What's up, duelists? Dragon Turbo, the deck that a lot of people are kind of, I don't want to say afraid of, but hesitant to be excited that it exists, if that makes sense. This is a deck that won the last two RBETs in the hands of Celiabot and Ghost Rider. Very powerful players, both of them. Done a lot of work, strides with the deck list and everything, and the game plans and everything. And today, what I'm going to do in the video is I'm going to basically show you guys how this deck works. A lot of people are kind of against testing this deck. They feel like it's a little bit uninteractive, but I think that's not as true as people may think. I'm going to show you guys exactly how the deck works, and then I'm actually going to show you a bunch of ways that you can counter this deck, not only using like specific counter cards, but cards that are more generic that people don't really recognize can actually counter this deck. So first things first, I'm going to pull up the list. This is the list here from Moreno Valley, the first place list. Shout out to Celiabot for taking down that tournament, winning a Shonen Jump Dark End Dragon. Very, very cool. I'm going to try to get Celiabot on for an interview when my schedule allows, but, good stuff, good stuff. If this is a deck you're interested in, let's go ahead and break it down a little bit. First things first, you got to have, your draw engines, because the way this deck works is you're trying to draw your entire deck, except for like 2 cards. And then on the next turn, you draw your entire deck, and then you OTK at the same time. So that's kind of the game plan, is just draw your entire deck, and then OTK your opponent through anything. The way this works is Cards of Consonance, pitching Whitestone, draws you 2 cards, and searches you with Blue Eyes. So it nets you a +1. It's a +1 draw engine, which is really strong. And then with that Blue Eyes, you can use Trade-In, or you can use Magical Stone Excavation as ways to convert that Blue Eyes into real card advantage. Once you've discarded a bunch of dragons, either due to Trade-In, Magical Stone, Card of Consonance, Card Destruction, or, Bryonic, Lightning Vortex, a lot of different ways to discard dragons here. You activate Super Rejuvenation, and you try to chain these together to draw anywhere between 3 and like 8 or 9 cards at the end phase of your turn. Stack the perfect hand, and then on your next turn, you guarantee a win. You use Gores and Trag to stay alive. You use Vortex Trooper to unbrick yourself. You use Reckless Greed as another way to gain advantage. Same thing with Future Fusion. Unlike other Dragon decks, Future Fusion is not a main part of this deck's game plan. All Future Fusion really is, in a lot of cases, is it's a 1-card draw 3. You send 3 Whitestones, and they search 3 Blue Eyes. So it's just a 1-card draw 3, and that can set up for your Magical Stones, or your Trade-Ins, or your Card Destruction, or whatnot. Even your Vortex Trooper gets set up by the Future Fusion. So while Future Fusion is good in this deck, it's not as insane as in like the other decks that are looking to like stack Wyvern effects and really amass that type of pressure. It's not like the main focus of this deck in the same way that those decks it is, if that makes sense. And then when you actually go for the OTK, that's the other part of this deck. What you normally do is you'll go for Heavy Storm if you have it. If you haven't drawn into Heavy Storm, then the alternate to that is Giant Trinade in the sideboard, or you can go Debris Dragon, Special Summon Whitestone, activate Instant Fusion, make a level 5 Kaminari attack, synchro with the Whitestone and the Kaminari attack into Bryonic, and then Bryonic can clear the back row or clear the board to clear the way for your OTK. Now these are 2 major choke points in the OTK, the Heavy Storm and the Bryonic, so we'll get into that, as well as the Debris Dragon Summon. That's another choke point in the OTK, so we'll get into that as well. And if that doesn't go through, then you can play maybe a grind game where you summon Debris, bring back Whitestone, you summon a Red Med, force them to answer it, and then on the next turn just do it again, because you have so much card advantage from the Super Rejuvenation. So you either want to play like an OTK strategy, or you want to play a grind game strategy, and then what your hand is at the end of all your draw spells kind of dictates whether or not you want to go for that. Let's go ahead and hop into a game, and I can explain exactly what this does, kind of in, well, not a game, but we're going to hop into solo mode, and I'm going to try to explain what this deck does, with regards to whatever. Well, this hand is kind of slow. I'm just going to grab random hands and play until we see something live, All right, we trade in. Yeah, this hand doesn't do anything. Okay, so this is step number 1 on how to beat this deck. A lot of times they have hands that just don't do anything, and that's just going to be the case. I think like about 25% of hands in this deck like just can't make a play. Like, look at this hand. This hand it was bad, but now it's good. Okay, let's play it out. Card of Consonance, pitch Whitestone, draw 2, search Blue Eyes. And yeah, even this hand is like it's not great. It's not great. If you are going first, you can do something like this, right? Just normal summon Debris Dragon. You identify, okay, we're going to go for a grind game. We have Heavy Storm. I'm going to Debris out Whitestone. I'm going to banish the Whitestone, special the Red Eyes. And then I'll use Red Eyes to either put out the Drago or a Blue Eyes or something like this. and then just be like, answer my board. And then on your next turn, you draw, and then, yeah, you can play from here. But a lot of draws, you are going to be playing this sort of like aggro grind game with this deck because it doesn't always hit that insane chain of draw spells, if that makes sense. Like, it's not super consistent to hit that. Like, about 30% of the games you're going to hit something like that. This hand looks like it might be able to hit that. You lead on Card of Consonance here because you want to thin that Blue Eyes out of your deck before you activate Upstart Goblin. Go ahead and search for that Blue Eyes White Dragon. And this hand is also additionally bricked. You know what I mean? Like, there's not really much happening here. Yeah, even with the Future Fusion. Let's see, does Future Fusion get us out of this? No, not really. It doesn't. I guess you can send Wyvern and put an M-Phase Red Med. So yeah, I guess the game plan here would be Future Fusion, sends Wyvern. You would send Drago, but it's in your hands. Send 2 white stones to search 2 blue eyes. Send a red eyes, and then send maybe like, I don't even know, another debris. I don't know if that's good. But yeah, you search 2 blue eyes. You might even just send one of the blue eyes instead of the debris to leave the debris in deck. I think that might be fine. But yeah, I mean, like I said, like, this is fine. You can set Heavy Storm or something, and then M-Phase, just bring out a red eyes. And it looks like you're playing a grind game here, you know? And it's not bad. Like, this is not a bad turn 1 setup by any means. But your hand doesn't really do anything, you know what I mean? So, as you can see, the points of interaction are, there's a few choke points in this deck. And if you can interact with those few choke points, then you're pretty much golden, I guess, if that makes sense. This hand has double Reckless. So Reckless Greed is really broken in this deck because usually once you have a critical mass of cards, you can do some stuff. So on the next turn, let's just say we activate both Reckless and just draw 4. Let's see what we can do with this. Nothing. That's insane. Yeah, Upstart Goblin draw. Okay, now we got something going here. We got the trade in. So you go trade in, pitch Blue Eyes, hope to find Cards of Consonance. Looks like you do not. So yeah, crazy to resolve double Reckless and be bricked, but I mean, that's just the way she goes, right? Like, you just have to set some cards. Maybe you can go Heavy Storm and then play a grind game, Red Eyes, Blue Eyes. That could be potentially it. You go Heavy Storm and then just banish one of these guys from the field, special summon the Red Eyes, bring out the Blue Eyes, and then just play a grind game where you're just up a bunch of cards. Like, this is totally fine too. Usually this deck, I'm going to say like 50% of games are going to look like this. They're going to look like I'm going to just play this kind of game, this kind of fair game, and I'm up a couple cards, and you have to deal with this really unfair, like, big dragon board, and then if you deal with it, maybe by then I've found my draw engine, right? So they use offense as the best defense, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just stack a hand that looks really good so we can maybe get an idea of, like, what exactly this deck does. Let's just search a white stone. Let's just search a couple white stones, actually. So we're going to grab a couple of these guys, and I'm going to put back, like, I don't know, red met or something. All right, so if you have a hand like this, you should be able to just turbo through your deck, theoretically. Draw 2, Surge Blue Eyes. All right. And this doesn't happen very frequently. Like I said, it happens like maybe 30% of the time you just turbo through your deck on turn 1. Cards of Consonance, draw 2, Surge Blue Eyes. Cool. This is kind of okay. Maybe you find Rejuvenation at some point. There we go. There's Rejuvenation. So now what you have is you have Rejuvenation. You activate it. You've discarded 2 dragons, right? Then you can go Magical Stone Excavation. Huge choke point here because this card can get blown out by DD Crow. Discard 2 more dragons. Add back that Rejuvenation. Play it again. So now you draw 8 cards in the end phase, which is really busted. This is really fucking good. And on top of that, you could even set up for your grind game here. You also have a guaranteed, like, pretty much OTK next turn. You have Gores to make sure you don't die. So you can do a bunch of stuff. You could even go for your baby debris, special the white stone, banish the white stone, or even instant fusion, special summon out, whatever the hell it is you want to special out. Like, you can go Kaminari attack, make whatever the fuck this wants to make. You can make Bryonic maybe. If you're scared of brain control, you can make a different synchro like Goyo Guardian or something. Search your last blue eyes out of your deck, just so that's not something you're drawing off your draw 8. banish the Debris Dragon, set up the Red Med, set up the Blue Eyes from your grave. And then basically what's happening here is you've got 8,000 points of damage. You can just bounce your opponent's board if they commit anything, and then end phase you're also drawing 8 cards, which is pretty crazy. And if you hit another Rejuvenation, you can play it as well. So we hit another one, we can just draw another 4. And then you have to discard cards, right? But you just pick the best 6 cards in your hand, and then you win. So that's kind of how this deck is supposed to work. You'll notice the big choke points here are normal summon Debris Dragon, Magical Stone Excavation, targeting Super Rejuvenation, and the Super Rejuvenation itself. Also, like, you know, you got to have a way to deal with this board, basically. So let's go ahead and jump into some counterplay for this deck. It is a very threatening deck, especially when it does draw the nuts. This deck doesn't usually care about things like Raikou Hamster, slower set monsters, and it also doesn't really care about things like Battle Fader and Gores and Trag as ways of defense, thanks to Kawaki Mare Drago, unless you have a way to interact with Drago coming out. So yeah, let's go ahead and just hop into some counters that I have picked out here. I've written some notes on how to counter this deck. Now, there isn't one really easy way to counter this deck. There are a couple cards that are like really good against this deck, I will say, but there isn't one really easy way, like one catch-all way to counter this deck. The most proven strategy, the most effective strategy in dealing with Dragon Turbo is having pressure plus 1 or 2 pieces of interruption at the right time. So most decks in the format right now are pretty good at pressuring. Let me pull up my notes real quick. But I want to talk more about the single points of interaction. So some of those moments you saw, I think one of the best interactive cards in the format right now is Pulling the Rug. In those combos, Debris Dragon is a key starter piece for those combos. It's a key starter piece for the OTK. If they summon Debris Dragon and they special summon out Whitestone, Debris Dragon's effect activates on the summon. So if you have Pulling the Rug set and it's defended, they don't have Heavy Storm, something like that, you can Pulling the Rug the Debris Dragon and it'll at least slow down their turn or stop them from potentially OTKing you. Now, they still can OTK you, but they need a lot more. Because let's say their hand is Instant Fusion, Red Eyes, Darkness Metal. Instant Fusion, Red Eyes, Darkness Metal is an OTK with Debris Dragon, right? But without Debris Dragon resolving, Instant Fusion, Red Eyes, Darkness Metal is only 5,800 damage. So you can use Pulling the Rug to basically stop the OTK, and it's a key piece of interaction at a crucial choke point. Similarly, DD Crow. DD Crow is also another one of those cards that is a key piece of interaction. These are 2 of the most commonly sideboarded cards in the game. They're good against a lot of different decks, so you're not really hurting yourself siding these cards. And on top of that, it just gives you extra points against Dragon Turbo. Now, they're not blowout cards versus Dragon Turbo by any means, but these 2 cards are really, really good at keeping you from getting OTK'd. And as long as your return pressure or your strategy on your turn is strong and proactive, then sometimes that's really all it takes to stunt this deck, is just have 1 or 2 of these pieces plus like good pressure and you just immediately win. So I want to cover those 2 first because I think that they're like pretty good. DD Crow has the added benefit of when your opponent goes for Magical Stone, this card here, they discard 2 cards and they target a spell card. DD Crow can actually hit spell cards. It can target any card. So they'll discard 2 cards, target a spell card, and you just DD Crow the spell card and you get a 1 for 3 DD Crow, which is like literally the best DD Crow I think you can get in this format, arguably. It's just so strong. It's just so strong at interacting with specifically Magical Stone. So if you are worried about this deck, you could even main deck those DD Crows. Now, I know some Dragon Turbo players like to side out Magical Stone, but the last two tournament winners were not doing that. They were not siding out Magical Stone Excavation. They were just saying, fuck it, you don't have Crow. So having the Crow is a good insurance against this card specifically, and I think Magical Stone Excavation is one of the more powerful cards in the Dragon Turbo deck that allows it to have those really, really big turns. And if you just have an interaction for that piece, it's not bad. So Pulling the Rug, DD Crow, cards that aren't really going to hurt your sideboard. They're not going to take away from your game plan that much. And they are cards that you can definitely bring in versus Dragon Turbo and have a good time. Pulling the Rug also has an added benefit. There's a card that a lot of these decks have been playing lately, which is Vortex Trooper. Both Ghost Rider and Sealybot were playing this card. When this card is normal summoned, it activates the effect. And so you can Pulling the Rug the Vortex Trooper. It isn't the best because it will proc the second part. If this card is destroyed, draw 1 card. So it will give them a card draw, but it does stop them from like potentially unbreaking a card, unbreaking a hand. So it's not the worst thing that it's live versus Vortex Trooper as well. Like, if you can tell your opponent's hands break, like they haven't done anything for the first turn, second turn, maybe it's kind of worth it to just pulling the rug the Vortex Trooper. So it does have another instance of interaction that I did want to point out, even though it's not nearly as good as using it on a Debris Dragon. Okay, the next card I want to talk about is a card that was in both the first and second place sideboards from RBET Moreno Valley, which is Prohibition. This card has gotten a lot better as the meta has gotten more linear, more aggressive, and more focused on strategies that are heavily consistent and play 3-ofs or even more of their number 1 threat card. So Prohibition is a great card against linear aggressive decks or linear like payoff spell decks like Miracle Fusion, Red Eyes Darkness Metal, even to a degree like Frogs. This card is really good against because you can just name Treeborn Frog and then their whole deck kind of just falls apart. There's a bunch of different cards that Prohibition can name, and it can shut off entire strategies currently that are very popular against Hero Beat, which is the number 1 most played deck right now. You just name Neos Alias and they can't play the game. It turns off their Neos Alias, it turns off their Gemini Spark, and it turns off Hero Blast. So it also does a good job of like slowing down Miracle Fusion, slowing down their pressure, slowing down everything else. So not only are you shutting off 8 cards with just 1 copy of Prohibition, but you're also, just slowing down their secondary strategy or their backup strategy, which is good too. So Prohibition is just, it's another, like these 2 cards right here, that's a great catch-all card that you can also side versus Dragon Turbo. I spoke to the second place player from Oscar from Moreno Valley, and he said he wished he had drawn Prohibition in the finals, because if he had, he probably would have won. Prohibition is such a strong card right now. I could see citing probably 2 of them in a lot of different sideboards. It's great against Dragon Turbo because let's say you have your Pulling the Rug, right? Then you don't need to name Debris Dragon, you can name Heavy Storm to protect your Pulling the Rug. Or let's say you have DD Crow, for example, right? You can Prohibition, you can name Super Rejuvenation, you can name Red Eyes Darkness Metal. It just depends on your hand and what you can and can't deal with. Just name what you can't deal with and then deal with what you can deal with the rest of your hand. Prohibition is a really strong card against Dragon Turbo. I'd highly recommend it. Honestly, just because it's good against like heroes and shit too. Like, it's like not a bad card. All right. Next card that is like fairly generic that I think is really good against this deck is Thunder King Ryo. So Thunder King Ryo has a lot of advantages versus Dragon Turbo. The biggest one is being able to negate Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. That's obvious, right? You negate Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. But there are a few like subtle things. So first off, it does stop that Whitestone of Legends search for Blue Eyes White Dragon, which does a great job at keeping their hand size small. That's very important for a lot of reasons. Another thing that Thunder King Ryo does do is when they do go for Bryonic, you can negate the Bryonic to defend your back row. So Thunder King Ryo basically says you have to have Heavy Storm, and if you don't have Heavy Storm, you can't play through my back row. So it forces them to draw and have Heavy Storm, and let's say you have Prohibition plus Thunder King Ryo. Prohibition, name Heavy Storm. Thunder King Ryo stops Bryonic. They can't play through your trap cards. You're probably going to win the game. That's just a good setup that I think is nice. Give me one second, folks. Apologies, I had to cough. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. I think I may have COVID, which sucks, but smash like, subscribe. We're out here recording regardless. Thankfully, it's not nearly as bad as the first time I caught it. So I'm not feeling too terribly today, but we'll see how it develops. You know the vibes. Okay, next generic card that I think is really good versus Dragon Turbo. Vanity's Fiend. So Vanity's Fiend is... it's just a house. It's just a house. The reason I like Vanity's Fiend versus this deck is because of that attack stat. The 2400 attack stat is too crucial on Vanity's Fiend. Fossil Dyna is okay versus Dragon Turbo, don't get me wrong, but the issue with Fossil Dyna is it can be attacked over by Kawakimera Drago or a few of the other cards in the deck like Red Eyes Wyvern if they are playing it, Card Trooper if they are playing it, and it can be walled out by Debris Dragon until they find their Lightning Vortex. Vanity's Fiend, on the other hand, represents very serious pressure. It's huge attack stat. It stops just about everything in their deck, and it can't be attacked over by anything they can normal summon, and it can't be walled by anything they can normal set. So I think Vanity's Fiend is the more ideal counter. I am going to put Fossil Dyna in here, just soft counter, but you have to understand that Fossil Dyna, it's going to need defense in order to be really effective, and the issue with that is you're going to need a lot of different pieces of defense. You're going to need defense from Heavy Storm, you're going to need defense from Lightning Vortex, and you're going to need defense also from from the monsters that are going to be attacking over your Dyna. And in general, battle traps are not very good against Dragon Turbo unless you stick the Dyna. And even then, it's pretty bad because, like, if you set a battle trap and then they just lightning vortex your Dyna, you're going to look like a fool. You just have that dead battle trap. So I think Fossil Dyna, it's effective in some cases where you just have it all. But Vanity's Fiend needs less because you don't need to have those battle traps and you don't need to have that defense against their monsters that can just run it over. So I think Vanity's Fiend is definitely more of a hard like lock piece against the deck, hard counter to the deck, whereas Fossil Dyna is a lot softer, a lot more fragile. And it's not a bad card to have versus the deck by any means, but it's just not where you really want to be. If you have the option to play Vanity's Fiend versus this, and Vanity's Fiend is definitely going to be better. Even though Fossil Dyna is a little bit faster, you don't need a tribute. So, yeah, there's pros and cons to both of these. I think Vanity's Fiend is a little bit better, but got to mention it. If the Dragon Turbo deck can't special summon, they really can't play the game. So, yeah, he's pretty key. They do side. Let me go back to that list. Where's that list? Is this what we have pulled up here? Is this the list? We do have the list pulled up. Okay, cool. They do side Lightning Vortex. So against Vanity's Fiend, they do have these 2 Lightning Vortex that they can dig into. And looks like Sealybot was also siding Soul Takers as well. So they do have spot removal spells for Vanity's Fiend. I think you have to take that into account when you have Vanity's Fiend. Maybe if you have Vanities plus Prohibition, you name one of those cards and just say, okay, you can't out my Vanities and my Prohibition stopping the other thing. So they need Heavy Storm plus Lightning Vortex or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to set up as many layers of defense as possible, force them to have as much as possible, and then pressure them at the same time. And that's why I think Thunder King Ryo and Vanity's Fiend are so good, because they apply that pressure while also forcing them to have an out all at the same time. Okay, let's get into a few other cards that I think are okay, like decent. Mind Crush is a good card versus this deck. You can just use it to name Red Eyes Darkness Metal or whatever. You do have to be careful because they can play around this by just sandbagging their Avarice and also just end phase discarding the card that they think you're going to name, or it's tough. It's tough because if you name a dragon and they just super rejuvenation, it's like you feel like you just fed them cards, which is bad. But I think it's still good enough. It's limited to 1 in Edison format, so you can only side 1. You can main it. I think it's not the worst main deck card right now because of the popularity of Heroes. And if you have it mained, which is kind of the upside over these other 5 cards, besides maybe Thunder King, you could probably main him. But if you're maining Mind Crush, that does give you a lot of extra percentages versus Dragon Turbo, which is cool. So yeah, these are all 6 of these cards. You could side them in any deck. Like you legit, Vanity's Fiend maybe not, but even Vanity's Fiend you could side in just about any deck. And I think that's kind of the draw to these cards, is there are 6 cards that you can bring in to help improve your percentages that aren't actually going to make your sideboard weaker in other matchups by any sense. Like they're actually going to still have that versatility of the sideboard flex options, which is nice. I always value versatility in sideboards, especially in highly diverse formats like Edison format, because there's a good chance that you go to a tournament and you have specific cards for Dragon Turbo in your extra or side deck, and you don't even face Dragon Turbo. There's actually like a really good chance that happens. So dedicating specific slots is, yes, it can be very good, right? But on top of that, not only do you need to draw those cards in the matchup, but you need to actually see the matchup to begin with. Otherwise, you have wasted sideboard slots, which is something you definitely got to consider. Okay, the next few cards, speaking of which, are more of that type. They're more of that like wasted sideboard slot type, but I think they have merit because of the current metagame. So the first one I want to talk about is Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell. This is a card that has a hefty cost. You have to discard a spell card to use it. So yeah, it's a real cost, a very real cost. And not a lot of decks play a ton of spell cards that can really take use of or take advantage of this, but disregarding the cost, it says negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it of a spell card that's activated. And if you do that, your opponent cannot activate spell cards with that name for the rest of the duel. So this card is insane versus Dragon Turbo. I think it's usually game ending if you hit Rejuvenation. So like if you just go Cursed Seal on their Rejuvenation, they usually lose. Which is just like, there are very few cards that just immediately end the game versus Dragon Turbo. And Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell is one of those cards. Now the reason I'm even mentioning this card is because, again, one of the most popular decks right now is Heroes. And one of their biggest payoffs is Miracle Fusion. So Cursed Seal, the Forbidden Spell, negating a Miracle Fusion. While that cost of discarding a spell card is very high, shutting off all 3 of your opponent's Miracle Fusions is really good. And also stopping Gemini Spark out of the Hero Beat deck is really, really good. This card does suck versus Blackwings. It also sucks versus a few of the other like top meta decks, but it's not that bad versus Frogs, which is kind of a popular deck as well. You can stop enemy controllers, you can stop soul exchanges, and you can stop other ways that they have of dealing with your monsters. So I think Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell, while it does have that really heavy cost, is a good card that you can side in this metagame specifically, just because it does have good coverage versus heroes. It has good coverage versus Dragon Turbo specifically, and it's also decent versus Frogs. It'll never be a main deckable card, but it is an interesting card, and I think it is worth mentioning. Another card that is similar, but slightly worse versus heroes, slightly better versus Frogs, is Anti-Spell Fragrance. There are some decks that can really take advantage of this card. This card hoses Dragon Turbo. If you flip this up, like their only out is to somehow get the Whitestone in the graveyard or go Whitestone, Instant Fusion, and they have to, set the Instant Fusion for a full turn. I think Anti-Spell Fragrance is really good in Blackwings because they have access to Icarus Attack and to a further extent Delta Crow Anti-Reverse. If you are playing Anti-Spell in Blackwings, you should definitely be considering some number of Anti-Reverse. And I also think it's a great card in Glads because Glads has Bestiari, Geyserus, and then, of course, Icarus Attack as well. And you can really take advantage of your opponent being forced to set those spell cards, and then you can just blow them up and just close your opponent out of the game. One thing I do want to mention, too, is Gladiator Beasts, Heraklinos. Where's that guy? There he is. I think Gladiator Beasts, if Dragon Turbo ever starts to get too popular, Gladiator Beasts will definitely see a rise in play. While the regular Dragon decks with like Trap Cards, DD Warrior Ladies, multiple Dragos, multiple Wyverns are insane versus Glads, Dragon Turbo is weirdly really bad versus Glads because all they have to do is just summon a Heraklinos early, and they can do that very freely through the 0 defense that Dragon Turbo plays, and then they just negate every draw spell and the game ends. So I think if we do start to see too much Dragon Turbo, the meta will naturally correct itself with Glads. And in the time being, if you do expect a lot of Dragon Turbo or this style strategy, Anti-Spell Fragrance in your Glad deck, it's just like a really insane tech, really insane way to deal with that sort of thing. Okay, and then the last thing I want to mention on dealing with this deck, I mean, this pretty much covers it. There are other cards that go a really long way. Royal Oppression is one that comes to mind. Royal Oppression, you can't play it in everything, but if you can, it's obviously insane versus Dragon Turbo. You do have to defend it. One good setup is Prohibition, naming Heavy Storm, and Royal Oppression. That's usually game, especially like unless they sided in like Giant Trunade. But if they're not expecting like you to have Royal Oppression or Prohibition, they won't side in the Giant Trunade, and so it'll be, I want to say, functionally game. As long as you can play through a Tragon Agors, then it's functionally game. Other cards that are good, Solemn, of course, if you're not playing Solemn, like Dark Bribe to a degree is okay, because it can stop Giant Trunade. It can stop anything. It's just a little bit undesirable because it does give them an extra draw to sort of keep going, which I don't love. But yeah, overall, like Dark Bribe on a draw spell isn't too bad because they're discarding a card. So even though it's a 2-for-2, but the issue is like they still get to discard that dragon, and it still pumps up their rejuvenation, which is ultimately what they're going for. However, Dark Bribe on a rejuvenation is sometimes better than just like not Dark Bribing the rejuvenation, because draw 1 is better than draw 8 or whatever. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, definitely a card to consider if this deck becomes more popular. I hope I did a decent job explaining this deck. I know that there's a lot more intricacies to it, and my biggest advice would be just to practice versus it, practice playing it yourself. I think the biggest choke points, like I said, are if they're not playing Trunade, then that Debris Dragon, that Bryonic Summon are big choke points. And then Heavy Storm's a big choke point. Super Rejuvenation's a choke point. That's why the anti-spell cards are very good. And then not being able to special summon is a great choke point, or cutting off Red Eyes with something like Prohibition's a good choke point. Another choke point that I do want to mention with DD Crow is if they have only one Drago, let's say you're main decking the Crow, you can Crow their Drago, and then your Gors also will do a pretty good job at keeping you alive. So, yeah, DD Crow can help you like defend your Gors, although I would say game 2 and game 3, they're going to side more Dragos in, And so I would definitely consider siding out your Gores and your Trags and your Vaders in Game 2 and Game 3. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you've encountered anything that helps you beat Dragon Turbo yourself, or if you've had any success or failures versus this deck, just let me know. I think the deck is a lot more interactive than people think, and I think the deck plays a grind game a lot more often than people think. And I think it is kind of a boogeyman, but like obviously because it does have those really strong draws, but there probably isn't a deck in Edison format that doesn't have an insane, really strong draw that's comparable. So I think it's just functionally, try to think of it as like a mid-range like Dragon Beat deck that can sometimes OTK you. And in those cases, like some of the other like usual suspects like Electric Virus can be okay. Brain Control, that kind of stuff can help you like just stabilize boards. Black Rose Dragon, summon an Armor Master, Spear Reaper, even those types of cards. Just depends on your strategy. You have to kind of localize and find which cards in your strategy are good against Dragon Turbo and which cards are not, both in their fair game, which happens I think the majority of the time, and in their unfair game. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.